A millionaire, leaving late for an important trip, saw a beggar with a baby in the rain. Without thinking, he gave her the keys to his house. When he returned, he entered in without knowing and was shocked by what he saw. David tapped his watch for the 5th time, frustration bubbling under his usually calm demeanor. Late again. His driver was stuck in the crawling traffic, and rain pounded relentlessly against the windows of the sleek black car. He sighed, running a hand through his neatly combed hair, his tailored suit spotless despite the humid atmosphere. "This trip is too important to miss," he muttered, clutching his briefcase tighter. The deal he was heading to finalize could secure his company's growth for years. Yet, as the wipers beat rhythmically against the windshield, something outside caught his eye. There, huddled under a barely functioning bus stop, sat a woman clutching a bundle of cloth. Her thin arms trembled as she shielded the baby in her lap from the torrential rain. The child whimpered faintly, its cries barely audible over the storm's roar. The woman's face was a canvas of exhaustion and despair, her matted hair sticking to her cheeks as she shivered in her soaked clothes. David's throat tightened. Not my problem, he told himself. He was already running late, and there were shelters for situations like this. Yet the thought didn't sit right. The image of the child's tiny fist waving in the air clung to him like the dampness in the air. "Stop the car," he barked suddenly. The driver hesitated but obeyed, pulling to the curb. David stepped out, rain drenching him instantly. He approached the woman, his polished shoes splashing in the growing puddles. She flinched as he neared, clutching the baby closer. "Here," he said gruffly, holding out a set of keys. "Take these. There's a house 3 blocks that way." He pointed. "Use it for shelter. I won't be back until tomorrow." The woman stared at him, wide-eyed and uncomprehending. "Are you serious?" "Yes, it's dry and safe. Go." He hesitated, awkwardly adding, "There's food in the fridge." Without waiting for her response, he turned and strode back to his car, wiping his face with a handkerchief. His driver gave him a quizzical look but said nothing as they merged back into traffic. In the back seat, David stared out at the blurred cityscape. He tried to shake the nagging feeling growing in his chest. "I'll check on her when I return," he whispered under his breath, unsure if it was reassurance or guilt speaking. As the taillights of David's car vanished into the rain, Sophia stood motionless, her breath visible in the chill air. The keys dangled in her hand, their weight far heavier than their size suggested. She looked down at Emma, her baby girl, who nestled close to her chest, whimpering softly. "Shelter," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible over the relentless downpour. She clenched the keys tightly, her soaked clothes clinging to her thin frame. The kindness of strangers wasn't something she was accustomed to. Not anymore. Her life on the streets had taught her to be wary, to expect nothing but hardship. Could this man's offer truly be genuine? Her mind raced with doubt. What if it's a trap? What if he changes his mind? Yet, looking into Emma's innocent tear-streaked face, she felt a surge of determination. She couldn't afford to let pride or fear dictate her actions. Not when her daughter needed warmth, food, and a dry place to rest. "All right, baby girl," Sophia murmured, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. She adjusted Emma in her arms and stepped out from under the flimsy shelter, her shoes splashing in the water as she followed the man's directions. The house was easy to find, its outline visible even through the rain. It stood proud and imposing, a sprawling mansion with large windows and a manicured lawn, though the weather now made it seem ghostly and unwelcoming. Sophia hesitated at the gate, her breath catching. Her reflection in the shiny black surface was a stark contrast to the elegance of the property. "This isn't for people like me," she whispered, shaking her head. But Emma let out a faint cry, her tiny fingers clutching at Sophia's shirt. With trembling hands, Sophia unlocked the front door. The warmth inside hit her like a wave. For the first time in months she felt safe, almost. She gently closed the door behind her and stood in the entryway, afraid to disturb the pristine beauty surrounding her. Meanwhile, in the back seat of his car, David leaned his head against the window, rain streaking across the glass like liquid memories. He tried to focus on his upcoming meeting, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman and her baby. He didn't even know her name. Sophia. Emma, the thought slipped through his mind like a whisper, unbidden yet persistent. A sudden sense of unease stirred in him. I don't know what's waiting for me when I return, he thought, the words settling uncomfortably in his chest. The soft hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, yet David couldn't shake his unease. He reclined in his first-class seat, the file for his business deal lying untouched on the tray in front of him. Outside the window, clouds blanketed the world below, but inside his mind, a storm brewed. David Prescott wasn't always like this. Restless, detached, burdened by a hollow ache he couldn't quite name. There was a time when his life was vibrant, filled with love and purpose. Those memories felt like another lifetime now. 5 years ago, David was the quintessential success story. A young, self-made millionaire with a thriving business and a loving wife, Claire. She was the heart of his world, her laughter echoing through their home like music. Claire's compassion balanced David's ambition. She often spent her time volunteering, urging David to do more than just grow his wealth. What good is success, she would ask, if it doesn't touch someone else's life? But fate was cruel. A car accident stole Claire from him 2 years ago, leaving him alone in the house they had made a home. The once lively mansion became a mausoleum of memories. Her favorite books still lined the shelves. Her garden, though untended, bore the flowers she had loved. David couldn't bring himself to change anything. Not the furniture, not even the coat she'd hung on the rack the day she died. In her absence, David buried himself in work. The hours were long, but they were a distraction. Profits soared, but fulfillment never came. The mansion grew quieter, the echoes of Claire's laughter replaced by the deafening silence of loneliness. This trip he was on now. Just another business deal. Another attempt to fill the void with numbers, mergers, and acquisitions. Yet, as the image of the rain-soaked woman and her baby flitted through his mind, he felt something stir. A faint memory of Claire's voice, her words. Touch someone else's life. David shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the gold watch on his wrist. The numbers blurred as his thoughts deepened. What had he done by letting a stranger into his home? And why couldn't he shake the feeling that it mattered? Back in the mansion, Sophia stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator. The polished steel surface reflected her worn face, her wide eyes still disbelieving. Food. So much food. She opened the door cautiously, the cold air brushing against her cheeks. Milk, eggs, fruits, bread. Things she hadn't had in weeks. She grabbed a small loaf and a container of baby formula, her hands trembling as she prepared a bottle for Emma. Once Emma was fed and asleep on a makeshift bed of blankets in the living room, Sophia sat down at the large dining table, her hands clasped together. The warmth of the house hadn't yet thawed the memories that clung to her like a second skin. Sophia Turner was once someone. A nurse, a wife, a mother-to-be. Her husband, Daniel, had been her anchor, a teacher with a gentle spirit and an infectious smile. They lived modestly but happily, dreaming of the family they were about to start. Then Daniel fell ill. What began as persistent fatigue turned into a diagnosis. Leukemia. The medical bills drained their savings, and when the treatments failed, Sophia was left with nothing. After Daniel's death, her pregnancy was the only thing keeping her from complete despair. But the months that followed were unkind. Bills mounted, her landlord evicted her, and without family to lean on, Sophia found herself on the streets with her newborn daughter, Emma. The past few months had been a blur of survival. Every day was a struggle to find food, shelter, and safety. Sophia had learned to keep her head down, to ignore the stares, and to live for Emma's sake. Yet, no amount of strength could shield her from the creeping fear that her best wouldn't be enough. Now, sitting in this stranger's luxurious home, she felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude and guilt. Why had this man, this stranger in a suit, taken a chance on her? What would he expect in return? Trust doesn't come easily when the world has taken everything from you. Her eyes wandered to a photograph on the wall, a smiling couple. The man was David, looking much younger, his arm around a beautiful woman with kind eyes. Sophia rose from her seat and walked closer, studying the image. For the first time she felt a hint of understanding. Perhaps this man had his own pain, his own reasons for helping. With a heavy sigh, she returned to Emma's side, pulling the blanket over her daughter. Whatever the reason, she would make the most of this opportunity. For Emma. For their future. The next morning, Sophia woke to the sound of birds chirping, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the vast living room where she and Emma had spent the night. For a moment, she felt disoriented. The soft couch beneath her and the warm blanket draped over her shoulders so foreign compared to the hard street she was used to. Emma stirred beside her, her tiny face serene in sleep. Sophia smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. This isn't permanent, she reminded herself, though the thought was bittersweet. But for now it's enough. Determined to express her gratitude, Sophia began exploring the house. It was like something out of a dream, a massive space with polished wood floors, grand staircases, and rooms she hadn't dared to enter yet. She found cleaning supplies tucked away in a closet and started tidying. Each sweep of the broom felt like a small act of respect for the man who had shown her kindness. As she cleaned, she noticed little details about the house that hinted at its owner. Family photos lined the walls, most featuring David and the woman from the picture she had seen the night before. There were bookshelves overflowing with literature, business manuals, and novels. On the mantelpiece sat a pair of wedding rings nestled in a small glass box, a testament to a life once shared. Sophia paused, staring at the rings. This house wasn't just a mansion. It was a memorial ***. Her throat tightened as she realized the depth of David's generosity. Here he was, still grieving, yet he had opened his home to a complete stranger. It gave her hope that the world still had room for kindness amidst the chaos. She carried on with her work, organizing as best she could and creating a small corner in the living room for Emma to play. She found a basket and used it to store some of the baby toys David had kept tucked away in a guest room, perhaps leftovers from family or friends who had visited. The act of arranging Emma's space felt oddly comforting, like rebuilding a piece of her old life. As the hours passed, the house began to transform, not in structure but in atmosphere. Sophia cleaned and rearranged with purpose. The kitchen counters sparkled, the windows gleamed, and the soft scent of lavender from an air freshener filled the air. She added touches of warmth, placing fresh flowers from the garden into vases, folding blankets neatly on the couch, and even propping open the windows to let in a gentle breeze. In the middle of her work, she paused by a small piano in the corner of the living room. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, playing a few hesitant notes. The melody broke the silence, bringing a rare smile to her face. Music. It had been so long since the house had heard music. Meanwhile, across the city, David was wrapping up his meeting when his phone buzzed. It was his housekeeper, checking in about her weekly duties. "I don't think I'll need you to come by this week," he said absently. "There's someone staying at the house." The housekeeper hesitated on the other end. "I thought you should know, Mr. Prescott. The house feels different. It's lively. It reminds me of when your wife used to..." Her voice trailed off. David blinked, caught off guard. Lively. The word lingered in his mind, unsettling yet intriguing. He hung up the call and stared out the office window, a strange curiosity growing in his chest. Back at the mansion, Sophia finished tidying and took a moment to sit by Emma, who was now happily rolling a small toy across the carpet. Sophia rested her head against the back of the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. David, the universe, or some unseen force that had given her and Emma this moment of reprieve. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for today they were safe. That was enough. David arrived home earlier than planned. His meeting had concluded ahead of schedule, and he couldn't suppress his curiosity about the woman and her child. The thought had nagged at him during the entire trip, this fragile hope that perhaps he had made some small difference, juxtaposed with the creeping fear that his impulsive act might have been a mistake. The driveway was quiet as he parked his car. No sign of the chaos he half expected. Stepping inside, he paused in the entryway. The house felt different, warmer. The faint smell of lavender tickled his nose. His shoes clicked against the polished floor as he walked further in, his sharp eyes catching the subtle changes. A basket of baby toys sat in the corner of the living room. The dining table gleamed as if freshly wiped. Even the air itself seemed lighter, as if someone had breathed life back into the mansion's cold walls. Then he saw them. Sophia sat on the couch, her head tilted back in exhausted repose. Beside her, Emma gurgled happily, gripping a toy in her tiny hands. A faint smile flickered across Sophia's face as if she could feel Emma's contentment even in her sleep. David's throat tightened. For a moment, he felt like an intruder in his own home. This wasn't the quiet, lifeless house he had left. It was something else entirely, something he couldn't define. Emma noticed him first. She let out a small squeal, drawing Sophia from her slumber. Her eyes flew open, panic flashing across her face as she saw David standing there, his expression unreadable. She scrambled to her feet, clutching Emma protectively. I didn't think you'd be back so soon," she stammered, her voice trembling. David crossed his arms, his gaze piercing. "I wasn't planning to be. Care to explain what you've been doing with my house?" Sophia's face flushed, and her hands tightened around Emma. "I just cleaned. I thought it would be a way to thank you." His eyes flicked to the baby toys, the flowers in the vase, the play area arranged neatly in the corner. "And the rest?" His tone softened, but the edge remained. Sophia swallowed hard. It felt wrong to just sit here doing nothing. "I wanted to make this place feel," she trailed off, unsure how to explain what had compelled her. "I didn't mean to overstep." David's jaw clenched as his gaze shifted to the mantel, where the glass box holding the wedding rings now gleamed in the sunlight. He turned back to her, a storm of emotions brewing within him. "Why did you use my wife's things?" His voice was tight, laced with an undercurrent of grief. Sophia froze. I didn't mean any disrespect," she said quickly. "I didn't know. I just wanted to make it feel less empty." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, though they weren't intended as one. David's heart pounded in his chest, the pain of loss and the unfamiliar stirrings of change colliding. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She shifted Emma in her arms, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I didn't want to come here. I didn't trust your kindness at first. People like me, we don't get help without a price." Her words cut through the tension like a blade, raw and unfiltered. "But I didn't have a choice. My baby needed shelter. She needed food." David's expression wavered, the hardness in his gaze giving way to something more vulnerable. "My husband. He died," Sophia continued, her voice breaking. "He was everything to me. After he got sick, we lost everything, our home, our savings, our security. I've been fighting to survive ever since, for Emma's sake. She's all I have left." Emma cooed softly, her tiny hand reaching for Sophia's face. Sophia smiled faintly, brushing her tears away. "I cleaned your house because I didn't know how else to show my gratitude. I wanted to earn the kindness you gave us, even if just a little." David's chest tightened as he listened. He saw the sincerity in her words, the desperation in her voice. Yet it wasn't pity he felt, it was something deeper. He glanced at Emma, her bright eyes full of curiosity, and felt a pang of recognition. She reminded him of what he'd lost, but also of something he hadn't realized he missed, the sound of life, the warmth of family. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "You didn't have to do all this," he said finally, his voice softer. "You could have just stayed." "That's all I expected." Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not how I was raised. You don't take without giving back. David nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on Emma, who now gripped one of his fingers with surprising strength. A flicker of a smile ghosted across his face. You're protective of her, he said, more a statement than a question. Sophia nodded. She's my whole world. For the first time since he'd returned, David relaxed slightly. He sat down in the armchair across from her, the weight of the confrontation beginning to lift. Tell me about her, he said quietly. Sophia blinked, surprised. Emma, she smiled faintly. She's the strongest person I know, and she doesn't even realize it yet. David's lips quirked upward, a shadow of a smile forming. Sounds like she takes after her mother. The next morning, David stood in the kitchen, watching Sophia carefully prepare breakfast. Emma sat nearby in a high chair she had fashioned out of cushions, happily babbling as she waved a wooden spoon in her tiny hand. The sight was almost surreal. His once empty home now buzzed with life, the silence replaced by the comforting hum of activity. David had spent the night wrestling with his thoughts. Sophia's words echoed in his mind, her story stirring something deep within him. Compassion, yes, but also a sense of duty. He couldn't ignore the truth. She and Emma had already transformed his home. But could he do more for them? Good morning, Sophia said tentatively, glancing over her shoulder. Her nervousness was evident, despite the soft smile she wore. She set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table. I thought you might want breakfast. David nodded, sitting down and gesturing for her to join him. Thank you. He took a bite, and to his surprise, the food was warm and comforting, much like the atmosphere in the house. You're a good cook. Sophia smiled shyly, her cheeks tinged pink. It's been a while since I've had a proper kitchen to work in. David set his fork down, leaning forward slightly. Sophia, I've been thinking. What if you stayed? She froze, her eyes widening. Stayed, she echoed, barely above a whisper. Yes. He glanced at Emma, who was now trying to chew on the edge of her spoon. You and Emma. I have more space than I know what to do with. And I'd like to help you get back on your feet. Permanently. Sophia shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. I can't impose on you like that. You've already done so much. You're not imposing, David interrupted gently. You've already made this house feel alive again. And I can see how much you love Emma. You deserve a chance to rebuild, and I can help with that. Maybe even get you back into nursing. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know me. David exhaled, his voice tinged with raw honesty. Maybe it's selfish. Maybe I need this as much as you do. After my wife passed, I shut myself off from the world. This house has been a prison, a reminder of what I lost. But now, it feels like home again. And that's because of you and Emma. Sophia's lip quivered, her resolve beginning to crumble. David, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He offered her a small, genuine smile. Just let me help. Though David's words were sincere, Sophia hesitated. The idea of staying felt too good to be true. She had learned long ago that nothing in life came without a cost, and she feared what might happen if she let herself believe in his kindness. David, I appreciate everything you've done, she began carefully. But I don't want to be a burden. You've already opened your home to us. That's more than anyone else has ever done. You're not a burden, David said firmly. If anything, you've been a gift. Sophia looked at him, her heart caught in a tangle of emotions. She wanted to trust him, to believe that his offer was genuine, but years of hardship had made her wary. I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. David leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. Let me tell you something about my wife, Claire, he said. She was the kindest person I've ever known. She used to say that helping others wasn't about what you could get in return. It was about creating ripples, about making the world better, even in small ways. Sophia listened intently, her defenses slowly crumbling as he continued. She would have done the same thing I did when I saw you that night, David admitted, his voice growing quieter. Probably even better. And I think she'd want me to see this through. To help you. Tears finally spilled down Sophia's cheeks as she nodded slowly. You're a good man, David. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm trying to be. Sophia reached for Emma, holding her daughter close as she whispered. Maybe it's time I stopped running. David extended his hand across the table. Then let's figure this out. Together. She hesitated for only a moment before taking his hand. For the first time in years, hope felt like more than a fleeting dream. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Sophia began rebuilding her life with David's help. He connected her with contacts at a nearby clinic, where she was able to secure part-time work as a nurse. Though the shifts were demanding, the familiarity of the hospital environment reignited a sense of purpose within her. It felt good to be needed again, to use her skills to care for others. At home, she balanced her work with caring for Emma. Her days were busy but fulfilling, and the once overwhelming mansion now felt like a sanctuary. With David's encouragement, she enrolled in an evening program to refresh her nursing credentials, paving the way for full-time opportunities in the future. Emma too thrived. The little girl had gone from a quiet, uncertain infant to a bright, giggling toddler. She adored David, squealing with delight whenever he returned from work. The two had developed a bond that warmed Sophia's heart, though it sometimes made her nervous. What if this doesn't last? The thought lurked in the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the progress they were making. One evening, Sophia stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner while Emma played in the living room. David walked in, loosening his tie and leaning against the counter. How was work? He asked, pouring himself a glass of water. Sophia smiled, wiping her hands on a towel. Busy but good. I feel like I'm finally getting back into the rhythm. David nodded, his eyes warm with approval. You're doing great, you know. I hope you're proud of yourself. She looked down, her cheeks flushing slightly. I couldn't have done it without you. You're the one putting in the work, he replied. I just gave you a little push. They shared a quiet moment of understanding. The walls that had once divided them were gone, replaced by a mutual respect and a growing friendship. David's life had also transformed. For years, he had existed in a haze of grief, going through the motions of running his business while shutting out the world. But Sophia and Emma had shattered that cycle. Emma had a way of pulling him into the present, her laughter filling the once quiet house with joy. He found himself looking forward to their playtime, whether it was building block towers in the living room or reading her picture books before bed. Sophia's presence had also softened him in ways he hadn't expected. She was strong yet kind, determined yet gentle. Watching her rebuild her life inspired him to confront his own pain. He began spending more time in the garden Claire had loved, tending to the flowers and even planting new ones. It felt like a way to honor her memory while embracing the changes in his life. One evening, David found himself sitting in his study, flipping through an old photo album. The pictures of Claire no longer brought the sharp pain they once did. Instead, they reminded him of the love and happiness they had shared. He closed the album with a sense of peace, realizing that while he would always miss her, life was meant to move forward. Later that night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she reached out to him with tiny hands, babbling something incoherent but filled with trust. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Good night, sweetheart." As he stepped out of her room, he found Sophia waiting in the hallway. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. "She loves you, you know," she said softly. David returned her smile. The feelings mutual. Together, they stood in the quiet hallway, the warmth of their shared journey enveloping them. Neither spoke, but the unspoken understanding between them was clear. They had become a family, not through blood, but through choice, resilience, and compassion. 6 months later, the house was unrecognizable, not in its structure, but in its spirit. Laughter echoed through its halls, and the warmth of life had fully replaced the cold emptiness that once prevailed. To celebrate the journey they had all been on, David and Sophia decided to host an event at the mansion, a fundraiser for single mothers and struggling families in the community. The evening was a flurry of activity. Guests mingled in the beautifully decorated living room, while volunteers manned tables filled with information about local support services. Sophia had worked tirelessly to organize the event, enlisting help from the clinic staff and even some of David's business contacts. David stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. He wore a tailored suit, but his usual formal demeanor was replaced by a genuine warmth that surprised even him. Watching Sophia move through the crowd with grace and confidence, he felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just her event. It was her triumph. The highlight of the evening came when Sophia took to the small stage they had set up in the garden. She held a microphone in one hand, the other resting gently on Emma's shoulder. The little girl clutched a stuffed bunny, looking around with wide, curious eyes. "Good evening, everyone," Sophia began, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight and for supporting a cause that means so much to me. A year ago I was lost. My daughter and I were struggling to survive, and hope felt like a distant dream." She paused, glancing at David, who gave her an encouraging nod. "But someone took a chance on us. Someone showed me that even in the darkest moments, there's still light to be found. That kindness has the power to transform lives. And because of that kindness, my daughter has a future, and I have a second chance." The crowd applauded, some wiping tears from their eyes. Sophia smiled, looking out at the faces of those who had come to support the cause. "This event isn't just about raising money," she continued. "It's about creating a network of hope and compassion for families like mine. Because no one should have to face life's challenges alone." Her words resonated deeply, and the evening ended with a renewed sense of purpose among everyone who attended. As the last guests left and the house quieted once more, Sophia and David stood together in the living room, surveying the aftermath. Emma toddled around their feet, clutching her stuffed bunny and giggling softly. "That was incredible," David said, turning to Sophia. "You did an amazing job." Sophia smiled, her exhaustion outweighed by her pride. "I couldn't have done it without you." Emma toddled over to David, tugging on his pant leg. He scooped her up effortlessly, her laughter filling the room. "What's up, Munchkin?" he asked playfully. Emma looked at him with wide, innocent eyes and then said something that stopped both David and Sophia in their tracks. "Daddy." David froze, his heart skipping a beat. He glanced at Sophia, who looked equally stunned, her hand covering her mouth. "Did she just," he began, but Emma interrupted with another cheerful "Daddy," as she hugged his neck. Tears welled in David's eyes as he held her close, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess she's decided." Sophia stepped closer, her own eyes misty. "She's never called anyone that before," she said softly. David met her gaze, the weight of the moment sinking in. "It's the greatest honor I could imagine." For the first time in years, David felt complete, not because of his wealth or his success, but because of the family they had built together. He looked around the room, now filled with laughter and love, and knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. As the night settled, the narrator's voice rose, weaving the story's final threads. In a world often ruled by chance, it was kindness that brought them together. And it was love that made them whole.